a large amount of xenon-129, which is the product of two things, supernova explosions and hydrogen bomb explosions, argon-40, and that's super abundant on Mars. So you have two things that are products of what look like an intense nuclear reaction.
Water valleys seemingly across Mars?
Obviously, right? Mars was just covered with liquid water. We were looking at Cydonia Mensa, which is a site where there's the face, and then there's nearby, like 5 miles away, there's a 5-sided pyramid. NASA never shows that picture of the face beside the pyramid together in any of their public photos because it becomes obvious. The scientists running the Viking program, who were determining where they were going to land, suddenly found themselves overruled by a group they didn't even know existed on the project.
Who were they overruled by?
NASA is I call it a hood ornament on the mysterious black sedan, which is the real space program in this country.
If you were talking to a conventional astronomer or Neil deGrasse Tyson, nobody could argue with that.
There's a famous series came out in the Miami Herald and other newspapers in probably the 50s. The author was Talbert, and he did a series where he found out that a number of aerospace engineering companies were suddenly interested in anti-gravity, and that people like DeWitt on up and down, really top level physicists, were suddenly getting grants to look at the idea of anti-gravity. For example, the gravity essay came along.
It's from the Gravity Research Foundation in Boston.
Right. And so it looked like it was going to be a big explosion. But anyway, then it all sort of quieted down. And I could take two implications of that, and that is it quieted down because nobody ever got anywhere. Or it quieted down because they did get somewhere and it went black.
So you think from Hal that's like a I can neither confirm nor deny statement, and
yes,
that it's I'm confirming without confirming it.
Hal is still very much part of that world, and he has to follow its rules.
That's right.
And so it would have great military importance. Einstein worked very hard on trying to do a unified field theory, to unify that, there are 4 forces of nature. 2 of them are infinite range. One is electromagnetism, one is gravity. The weak, the strong force, they run things at the size of the nucleus in the atom. And they're powerful, but they don't have long range. So Einstein just figured, okay, I can pick out the 2 long-range forces and unify them. And he made a lot of progress, and he helped get Kaluza-Klein theory, which has a hidden 5th dimension to unify gravity and A&M mathematically.
How did you get into the idea that there may have been life on Mars in the past, in the distant past?
The Viking missions had been in 1976, and when I was in graduate school, and they gave the verdict, they tested for life in the soil, and they said—
You want to just tell people, what are the Vikings?
The Vikings were a very ambitious double probe mission. It was ultimate vacuum tube technology kind of mission. And they sent these probes to Mars. They photographed the surface of Mars in great detail with just superb cameras. They landed 2 landers to test the soil for life. And they got mixed results, which now can be interpreted as they found life.
And what exact isotopic signatures did they find?
Well, they found a large amount of xenon-129, which is the product of 2 things, supernova explosions and hydrogen bomb explosions. And we know there was no supernova on Mars. If there was, there wouldn't be a solar system here.
And you said there was one other, argon?
There was when you irradiate rocks that have potassium in them, and all rocks do, they produce a isotope called argon-40, and that's super abundant on Mars. So you have 2 things that are products of what look like an intense nuclear reaction on Mars in the atmosphere. So, but they also found what looked like archaeology on Mars. And that was initially the most exciting thing. I only found out the significance of the isotopes on Mars from a staffer at Sandia Labs.
What's the convention? If I were to be sitting across from Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I said, I were to say, because he's
I've
trying
met
to
him, he's a very pleasant fellow.
He's tried to explain away, the face on Cydonia or whatever that, this famous, seemingly artificial structure.
I would love to
whatever.
sit down and talk with him.
That would be great to host a debate. He did.
As long as they let me bring my pictures of it from NASA.
Yeah, I think he would shy away from debate. I think he likes, to kind of pontificate and like act smarter than everybody else on his own show. But
I'm calling him out. Throw down, dude.
I know. Well, we've called him out multiple times on the show.
Throw down.
And he just, I think he's
I'll be
afraid.
waiting.
Yeah, let's do it. But from your lips to God's ears. But so if I were sitting across from him, let's just a little audience surrogate devil's advocate question.
Sure.
How would he explain xenon 129 and argon 40?
He can't.
But would he admit?
That's the short answer.
Would he admit
it is? He probably wouldn't admit it, but I've
no. But would he admit that we found those?
Oh, yes, he would. Yes,
that's a fact.
That's a fact.
Okay.
That's indisputable. And
so he would just say there's probably some other explanation, but I don't know what it is.
But yeah, that's what he would say.
Yeah, that's
and
usually the case.
I have reviewed the literature very carefully on this. You can imagine I'm sticking my neck out as a scientist.
Yep.
But I found that the consensus among the real experts on isotopes, not just on Mars, but on the other planets and meteorites and things like this, is that there is no explanation for the xenon 129 superabundance or the argon 40 superabundance.
Yeah. So let's get into other possible evidence. Okay, so that's really interesting. And do the two, so xenon 129, that would come from these large hydrogen explosions,
yes.
Is that right? And then argon...
And supernovas, but it was not a supernova on Mars.
Right, and I don't think anybody would contest that because it's not a star, it's a planet. So and then the second thing, the argon 40, that's a result of some sort of explosive event with potassium, is that right?
Well, it means a lot of potassium was irradiated by neutrons.
Okay.
Which is a typical byproduct of any hydrogen bomb or any nuclear explosive produces a lot of neutrons. That's where they got the neutron bomb.
And okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so that's kind of hard to argue with, right? Like that's one piece of evidence, right? With it. Now let's get into other possible evidence. So water valleys seemingly across Mars.
Obviously
right?
Mars was just covered with liquid water. I was the one to find the Martian ocean.
You were?
Yes.
How'd you find it?
Well, actually it was, we were looking at Cydonia Mensa, which is a site where there's the face and then there's nearby, like 5 miles away, there's a 5-sided pyramid. NASA never shows that picture of the face beside the pyramid together in any of their public photos because it becomes obvious.
Really? Because
we're
they're
looking
so
at
close.
Archaeology,
And Cydonia is what region of
Cydonia is in the northern part of Mars. It was considered the garden spot of Mars. They wanted to land one of the Viking landers there. But then, in something that was kind of scandalous, the scientists running the Viking program, who were determining where they were going to land, suddenly found themselves overruled by a group they didn't even know existed on the project.
Who were they overruled by?
They were never sure. NASA just said basically the boys downtown say you can't land there.
Do you have any theories?
They had already taken pictures of Cydonia with the Mariner 9. And
so Mariner 9 was pre-Viking.
Pre-Viking. That was the one where they discovered all the water channels and the Great Valles Marineris. But then the Viking pictures showed clearly this face, and then they also found this pyramid nearby. And so, and they were doing, that was part of the surveys to see if it was safe to land there. They were worried about hitting big rocks when the thing came down. So it's a reasonable error. But then they just said, oh, we can't land in Cydonia Mensa because it's too rocky. No, it wasn't too rocky. It was the fact that the face was there and the pyramid was there.
But who's calling these shots?
The Intel and Defense Department. NASA is I call it a hood ornament on the mysterious black sedan, which is the real space program in this country.
And that's just completely bound up with it.
It is.
Three-letter agencies.
They make sure that they clear everything with the three-letter agencies.
Okay, so you have this.
That's my understanding.
So you have this face of Cydonia, the pyramid of Cydonia. You have this other artificial structure, which has recently been popularized.
The square on Mars. I call it the Mars Masada.
The square on Mars. You have the even conventional understanding that there was probably water on Mars.
Oh, yes. There was an ocean on Mars. And what happened is we found that there was a shoreline near Cydonia Mensa. It was like on the Riviera of Mars. And we followed the shoreline around because they had good elevation contours. And we found that the elevation contour of what was called 0 kilometer wrapped all the way around the planet, and the transition in terrain was dramatic. It was rocky and rugged above that elevation, and below it, it was all smooth. Obviously, it was old ocean bottom, and also the river channels all fed into this basin.
And if you were talking to a conventional astronomer or Neil deGrasse Tyson, nobody could argue with that.
No.
Everybody says that water probably existed on Mars.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. One guy kept saying it was liquid carbon dioxide, which is ridiculous.
And is that taken?
That's the only other. You had to have something that was common that was liquid to make these channels, and water is the most abundant chemical compound in the universe. It's made of hydrogen, and oxygen is the third most abundant element in the universe. And so it has to be water. And so it's been confirmed. I gave my paper at a scientific conference in 1986 to a room full of Mars scientists. And yet NASA will never mention my name.
Really?
It's actually should be called the Brandenburg Ocean.
Wow.
I just called it the Paleo-ocean of Mars, but it should be called the Brandenburg Ocean. And
but who retrieved the images first? It was the Viking team, or was it a telescope, or?
It was the Viking team.
But then you sort of spotted it.
Oh, yes.
Interesting.
And
what were you doing at the time? What was your
Well,
official capacity?
we were investigating. We had good Mars maps. They were actually.
What was your role though? Like, what was your job title?
In the Independent Mars Investigation, headquartered at SRI, interestingly enough.
Stanford Research Institute.
It's the same place where we found out later that the remote viewing program was just down the hall from the headquarters of the Mars Investigation.